an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Speaking Bones, Chapter 24, and only 24, The Battle of Crescent Island, Part 2, the 7th month of the 11th year of the reign of Season of Storms and the reign of audacious freedom. In this chapter, we get to see a couple of compromises being made by the people who are leading this battle, and I am still not really sure who won this thing. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Kyle for commissioning this episode. Hey, Kyle, what's up? Kyle is here in the chat. I just wanted to mention, if you can hear that, I had to bring my doggy in yesterday. Sam, he is the one that still needs a home. I had to bring him into the vet to get a tumor removed yesterday, and also to be neutered. So he has a couple of incisions that are all stitched up, and he can't be outside because it could get dirty, and also because he would run and jump, and he's not allowed to do that either. And also it's best for him to be kind of separated from his brother right now because his brother will lick at him. So I have been keeping him in his crate, but he spent all night last night and all day today up until like 4 p.m. in the crate. And I felt like he really deserved a change of scenery. So I brought him into my office because he's been quite quiet and low-key compared to yesterday when he was whining a lot. But he found a bone. And I have wood floors. And he is really going to town on this bone. So my apologies if you can hear this clunking in the background. Just know that it's a great and lovely thing because it means that he is like feeling a little bit better and having a good time. Apologies if it is distracting, but I stand by my decision. So he may give up. Sometimes he'll just lose interest really quickly. So for all I know, he'll stop chewing this bone in like a minute and you won't be able to hear a thing, but he may just keep it up. So sorry if that bothers you, but it's not too bad. I think we should be okay. Anyway, enough of my life story. Let's talk about chapter 24. So we ended the last chapter right as the ornithopters were released on all of the Gorinophins. And reminder, these ornithopters are the creation of Rati, she has managed to make them all fly in like different and erratic patterns, but she's done it in a mass production kind of way so that they all are like a row of like 100 can be made all at the same time. And I am extremely interested in the developments that might come from that kind of mass production. But the effect of the ornithopters, it turns out there's like a lot more going on with these guys than I was thinking. Because what I was thinking was like, oh, they'll have blades or they may have bombs. But there's another part of this as well. So first, we find out that some of the blades are just like, they may scissor or they may just spin. And I'm imagining like something, a helicopter-ish, which truly does sound quite terrifying. Even if the blade isn't that sharp, that can still really fuck you up. And I'm imagining these are like razors. And even though this can't necessarily affect the Gorinophin, the whole thing with the riders is that they are unarmored because they need to be agile and go like move with their mount and everything. And they are completely unprotected. So these things may not be able to fuck up the Gorinophin terribly badly, but the riders are getting like minced up, and some of them cut the webbing that keeps the riders secured to their saddles, which means that they just fucking slide right off into the ocean, which is super embarrassing. I'm just going to say it. That feels like it would be a very embarrassing way to die. Other ornithopters were packed with firework powder, as well as small Ogade jar as a spark fuse. Swerving from side to side like drunken bats, these autonomous bombs crashed into the Gorinophins and exploded on contact, maiming riders and starting fires along the webbing. Still other ornithopters spewed a viscous and oily liquid that sizzled against the hides of the Gorinophins and burned right through the skin of any rider unfortunate enough to be sprayed. And we find out later, I thought that was bad enough, but that shit is extremely volatile. And they add water, and it turns out to be basically explosive. And I really felt like it was bad enough, but that's extra rough. So then we finally get like a bit of a step back. You know, we've been thrown into this. We're hearing what they can all do and the, you know, people like jumping off or falling off. But then it says, in truth, the direct damage caused by the swarming ornithopters was minimal. The mechanical birds were flapping about blindly with no coordination, striking targets more by chance than design. But the same principle by which a burly man would jump around and swat the air in terror when approached by a few buzzing wasps, would the Gorinophins and their riders were panicked. The flying behemoths, is that how you say that? Behemoth, right? The flying behemoths swatted at the swarming ornithopters with their claws and long tails, and the riders batted at the nettlesome artificial creatures with their war clubs and axes. But the nimble ornithopters darted about in unpredictable ways, and most of the strikes missed. And when the Liuku did succeed in hitting the zigzagging ornithopters, it only made the situation worse, for often the destruction of the ornithopter resulted in a firework powder explosion or a spray of burning acid. Which, that did not occur to me, that like by breaking them, you may just release whatever their weapon is directly on you instead of disabling it harmlessly. And that sucks. What a lovely like byproduct though. By chance, one of the firework ornithopters crashed against the head of a Gorinophine and exploded, blinding its left eye. And you guys know, we get in the next like several pages a lot of Gorinophine injury, which honestly I know is like low-key what we're aiming for, right? Of course, killing the riders is part of what we're attempting to accomplish here. But because of the way these Gorinophine have been raised, it by design, these riders could be replaced by anybody. The Gorinophines are the things that are low-key irreplaceable. So if we're not damaging the Gorinophine, it's not really like accomplishing what we want. And as much as I understand that intellectually and I admire this tactic in terms of its effectiveness, I can't deal with the description of all of these Gorinophines getting like really hurt. It sucks and it makes me sad. And this one, like, its left eye is blinded and its rider is trying to crawl forward along its neck in order to treat the wound. And it like lunges backward and grabs the rider. The unfortunate rider died almost instantly as her spine snapped, and the lifeless body dangled from the Gorinophine's clawed foot as the creature whipped its serpentine neck about, menacing the other riders. I just really felt for this poor thing, you know? I mean, I do at this moment have a dazed and confused dog in my office, absolutely going to town on a bone because he has a couple of injuries and they're not even like accidental. We did this on purpose for his own good. And it breaks my heart. So all I keep thinking about is like, what if I was trying to help him with his little injuries and he just like snapped my neck and killed me? It'd be so sad. I'm more sad about him than I am about myself. So the fact that this Gorinophine begins to completely lose its shit, like it's been trained, but the pain is too much. It is kind of falling out of its training. It begins to be a danger to the others around it. And the other Gorinnefin have to sort of gather and try and put it out of its misery. But these fucking things are still flying around their heads. And I was kind of expecting them to have wound down by now. I don't think that I realized how long they were going to be in the air. But they are, for a while, still flying all over the place. And Goztan, meanwhile, has been giving the signal to retreat, and nobody can, like, either they are not paying attention because they are caught up in this thing, or they can't control their mounts to obey her in the first place. So at this point, we see this guy named Rufira. He has noticed that there is a space around the airships that doesn't have any of these little machines. And he's like, okay, so we'll just pull all of our guys over there and get out of the way of these things. Which I'm like thinking as he notices this, that feels awfully convenient. Like, of course you don't want them near your airship because that's a danger to the ship. So you design them so that they launch a bit of a way before they begin to sort of unfold and activate. But also, the airships are like still just chilling there. That's interesting. And yeah, it turns out that this is a bit of a trap. So he lets everybody know we're going to go over to this spot where none of these things are at. And he climbs up on the Gorinnefin's neck. And the one that he's riding is like, has been raised in a more gentle way than the others. So it trusts him, because otherwise it would likely have thrown him off or just not listened to him. What he does is massage its eyelids to try and convince it to close his eyes, because Rufira is thinking that like the sight of all of these things buzzing around it is freaking it out. And if I could just get it to ignore the visual of all of these little sort of gnats in the air, it would be okay, and it would just fly through and listen to me. And the Gorinnefin actually goes with it and closes its eyes and opens its eyes, feeling like a bit of triumph when they come out in that empty space where none of these things are. But then we cut to Motakifi, and he is saying, let them right up against us. A Gorinnefin pulled up right in front of the gondola. Give 'em hell, shouted Mota. Rufira surveyed the clumsy airship's boxy gondola with confidence. It was by no means an accident that he had called for the other pilots to gather their mounts here. Earlier, he had observed the defenses of the airship with care, and noted that the gondola was the most heavily defended part of the ship, thus the likely locus of the bridge and senior officers. So he really thinks that he is being super clever here, but everything that he is discerning is predicted. They are attempting to get him in this exact spot. And he's really thinking, ha, we've got you now. Like it says the barbarians had run out of tricks, but they had not. So he gives the signal for the Gorinnefin to unleash their fire, and he is anticipating that they are going to use water hoses to put the fires out, and isn't worried about it. He's thinking like, well, there's enough of them that they won't be able to put them all out. But what happens is that the water hits the like oily acid, and it says it began to hiss and sizzle, bubble and explode. The acrid smell of burning flesh filled the air, and smoke rose in thick plumes. It was as if the Gorinnefins were covered by miniature erupting volcanoes, which I just can't emphasize enough sounds so horrifying. Like, that's just a nightmare. I feel so bad. Like, these creatures probably just wanted to mind their own business, and they are here in this stupid war with these asshole people, and they didn't want any part of this, and I just really feel for them here. So they begin to completely lose their shit. The like liquid is dribbling down between the seams of their armor, so their armor is really not doing anything to protect it. If anything, it's like trapping the stuff against their skin. And a bunch of the warriors just leap off because they are otherwise going to get roasted alive since they're starting to like randomly shoot fire in different directions. Rufira managed to get his mount under control and pulled away. The pilots of Gurinophins in the back of the attack group managed to pull away as well, but it seemed certain the Gurinophin force would suffer an unprecedented carnage today. And as we find out later, about 20 Gurinophin, like a little less than 20, were taken out in the battle. Not necessarily all right here, but in total for the day. Again, I'm very sorry about my dog's bone. So we go back to the spirit of Kiji, and we find out about this solvent, which is something that was used from, was like discovered by herbalists, that it was extremely volatile. And he's thinking how probably Empress Gia would be like kind of delighted at the way that they used it here. And we get a bit of a just behind the scenes about how it works, but we had pretty much figured it out, I think. Then we go to Goztan, and we get a really interesting moment here. She says to her personal guard, launch the special reserves. And this is a big deal. She tells them this, and then all of a sudden, these reserve Gurinophins launch into the air. But the riders have longbows and arrows. They are not Liuku. They are Ukyu Ta'asa. And this is extremely humiliating for the Liuku. Now, it doesn't have to be. That's the thing that I find the most infuriating about this sort of thing, is that because they have bought so completely into this bullshit that Goztan Ryoto was telling them about the inherent superiority of the Liuku, if they weren't so convinced of that or willing to believe it, I don't even think convinced is the right word, because it's really an agreement that they have kind of come to mentally, that they have decided to believe something because it fits with what they want and what makes them feel better. But if they hadn't bought into it, they would be able to appreciate using new technology and using the same technology as the enemy against them. But instead, they see this as an inherent failure. And we find out, actually, and I didn't know this, I don't know if it was mentioned and I forgot, but apparently the Battle of Zathan Gulf, I had forgotten that Noda-Mi is like part of he is the one who comes up with the idea of like using the fire arrows on Gin Mazzoti's airships. So they didn't win that battle because of their Liuku technology and their superior fighting force. They were defeated and able to get away because they had somebody with the technology and the insight from the opposing side to give them whatever like knowledge they needed on how to do this. And so it turns out that the fact that they that was how they survived, not even won. They didn't even win. They lost, but they managed to get away without completely losing their whole force. But because they owe all of that to someone from Dara, it has caused this deep self-loathing and humiliation. They have this huge shame around it. So what is going on here? I had thought, we had seen a couple of moments where we're with Tanvanaki and she's thinking about this secret plan that she has in place. And when we see the reveal of all of these Gurinophin with armor, that's what I thought she had been thinking about. But it turns out she was thinking about these people who are being trained to ride. The fact that everybody has bought into this really hardliner stance about the superiority of the Liuku means that any concession to using Dara technology is seen as a failure, and anything like they have managed to sort of scrape by with the whole using airships and whatnot, and have been pretty convincing about why that's actually okay. It's still kind of side-eyed, but it's not as frowned upon because it is described as like an enhancement of a traditional scouting tactic that is a Ryukyu tradition. So it's fine because it's only using something like new to augment a sort of chore we already do. And that's all well and good. But the thing is that what we get here are these incredibly sacred to the Ryukyu creatures that are it's like they're part of their sort of family, which is a fucked up thing to say considering the way that they treat them. The Garinafin like represent the Ryukyu themselves. Goztan and Tambanaki both agreed to train Dara like deserters. These are not, they are slaves in the like broadest sense of they don't have any other choice but they could serve the Ryukyu in another way, but they have agreed to learn how to fly in order to face their own people in battle, which is a very particular kind of betrayal that they are apparently fully agreeing to take on. This is the kind of thing that Goztan is extremely aware is probably going to come back and bite her in the ass. Like, she knows it's necessary and is kind of, she's basically telling herself, if this keeps my people alive, then fine. I will be shamed for it. And it will be a whole, like, what's the word I want? It will be a scandal, kind of, is the energy here. Potentially even enough of a scandal for Tambanaki to be like knocked down out of her position, which I hadn't thought about it that way. And my instinct was like, well, if this wins the battle though, but later on we hear people like muttering amongst themselves, and one of the like comments that she overhears is somebody saying, we had Goztan Ryoto plan this entire battle, we wouldn't be here in the first place. You know, we wouldn't need these fucking barbarians to help us because she knows what she's doing and we wouldn't wind up so desperate. And I've got to admit, I hadn't thought about them framing it that way, where it's like, if we just listen to the wrong person from the beginning, it makes sense. And it actually, like, I can't say that if I were in their position, I wouldn't have put it that way either. But I really didn't, I'm concerned now about what's going to happen, because for me, Goztan Ryoto, it has been like, I have personally been of the delusion, you could say, that it's just a matter of time before Tambanaki manages to take Goztan Ryoto out of the picture. And it had never occurred to me that perhaps I would see Goztan Ryoto win and take over. And is that going to be worse than what's happening? I'm not even sure. Because Goztan Ryoto has so much power already, and Tambanaki is so sort of impotent at the moment, that maybe not a lot would even change if Goztan Ryoto took over. But it's the principle of the thing. You know, I don't want Tambanaki displaced. It's not just like the cruelty and the insanity, actually, of Goztan Ryoto, because like, I say that from the fact that she has this incredible superiority complex, but also now she's taking these Toleusa berries, which are probably having an effect on her mentally. It's not just that, though. It's like there's a part of me that wants something to be worked out between Dara and the Liuku, and that's absolutely impossible if Goztan Ryoto is in power. Like, Tamvanaki, it's already going to be difficult, and she has a lot of pressure on her, and the traditions that she's going to have to maintain are, like, in the face of the sea change that has happened under Goztan Ryoto, it is probably going to be a big challenge to find a sort of like peace treaty agreement that would satisfy her people and keep her in power with them, but also be acceptable to Dara. So I'm not saying that it would be easy, but I feel that Tamvanaki is smart enough to figure out a way. And she is willing to compromise and understands long term what needs to happen for her people. Goztan Ryoto has no interest in the long term anymore. She is so sure that no matter what happens, they are going to be able to like she has like a very might is right kind of attitude and really thinks, despite the fact that they have no reinforcements coming now through the Wall of Storms, they are alone. But she really believes that if they just believe, like between the spirit of the Liuku and having Garinnafins and just their like overall bloodthirstiness, that no matter what, they're going to be able to overpower Dara. Which, now that you don't have reinforcements, I just don't see that happening, my friend. Like, it's a matter of time before you guys get crushed. You are surrounded by these islands. And I'm more worried about the idea of Tamvanaki being taken down than I was expecting. But at the same time, if we're attempting to, like, dismantle the Liuku, putting Goztan Ryoto in place, that's... The thing is, as much as the customs and beliefs of the Liuku are abhorrent to me, the fact that they engage in slavery at all, and just how violent they are towards each other, towards their mounts, like, I do not like the Liuku. But I also recognize that just because I don't like them doesn't mean that they don't have a right to exist as a people. And so I don't just want them to lose in like a black and white way. I want for there to be a way to make this work. And I'm just not sure there is one. If Goztan Ryoto's like beliefs have taken hold, plus the fact she has been giving everybody all of these Toleusa berries, which Goztan, she even gives her people some, and she's like kind of resistant to doing it. But what she keeps thinking is that they have injuries that they need basically to get kind of hyped up to overcome. And they have, a lot of them are just really tired and need to be stimulated to stay awake. And then there's also just like the morale factor, because even though these Dara riders come out on the back of these Garinnafins and light the fuck up all of these airships and do sort of turn the tide of things, despite that, the morale is really low because it's a humiliating repeat of what happened at Zathan Gulf. So she's hoping that she can use the Toleusa in sort of a similar way in some ways as Goztan Ryoto. But because she doesn't understand like what the long-term effects are going to be of this stuff, she can't appreciate there's just going to be a consequence to all of this Toleusa. And I have been waiting for more signs of it to show, But I think the only way that we're going to start seeing the signs of what these berries can do to people is when the supply stops. Or because Gia was saying like her plan was almost complete, there was just one more shipment. I'm wondering if maybe she like dosed the berries with a very low amount of the drug that she made and was increasing the amount that it contained with every shipment. And maybe the level that they are currently at isn't where she wanted it to be before she stopped the shipments. But the only thing that I think saves Tambanaki after showing her people her hand and the fact that she is willing to compromise with the Gorinnefins in this way, I think the only thing that saves her is the complete breakdown of Goztan Ryoto and her most ardent followers due to the drug. Otherwise, I don't see it happening. And what my question would be is like, if there were a breakdown, and obviously so many people are taking this drug now, it wouldn't just be them, but they are the ones that have been given it the most and from the earliest time. So they would be the most affected, I would think. So what would the Ryuku think about them all going into withdrawals? Because those kinds of withdrawals can really manifest differently in different people. And I don't know if it causes hallucinations, because that can happen. That can even happen with just like alcohol withdrawal. People can see things. So are other Ryuku going to watch this happen and think that this is like a punishment of the gods? Are they going to even make the connection with the Tuleusa berries and realize that that's what's happening? Or are they going to think this is some witchcraft of the Dara people? Like, because they think they've been abandoned by the gods and that they have to prove themselves. So would they interpret a withdrawal that causes like debilitation? Would they interpret that as the gods basically saying, well, you failed, you did not prove yourselves, and here's how we are going to punish you? I'm in this place where I'm like, I don't want to see the effects because I know how gruesome it is. And I don't mean in terms of like separating sores or anything like that, but just the way that it completely overpowers physical impulses and desire. It's just a really awful thing to witness. That said, if there's anybody who deserves that kind of suffering, it's Goztan Ryoto. Like, the woman is a complete monster. And her fucking little minions were the ones who literally tore people limb from limb. Twice, by the way, on that ship. So it's very hard for me to be like, nobody deserves that. Some people apparently deserve that, and these would be them, in my opinion. So anyway, all this to say, this moment of announcing that it's time for the special like forces to come in is a really difficult moment that Goztan knows is going to have long-lasting ripple effects, and it is a kind of solemn scene when she calls them and everybody looks up and realizes who is riding them and what their weapons are, and begins to put two and two together and understand the full import of what's going on. Whatever their motivations, these native fighters were willing to gamble their lives in the service of the Ryuku. Goztan then turned to her most trusted pilots, veterans who were sympathetic to the accommodationist cause, and explained the importance of a Phyro arrow unit to the Ryuku. Reluctantly, they agreed to the scheme. Once Tambanaki secured for the unit a deserted training ground near Fada, the pilots and would-be riders went to work in earnest. And that was another point that I had not considered, which is the people who trained these guys. Not just the fighters themselves, but the folks who trained the fighters are going to be completely, if not just ostracized, they could be executed. Like, everybody is going to see them as traitors, if not in act than in principle. Yikes. Like, this is a complicated situation. And it ends with, like, she had to save Ukyutaasa. She had to. She prayed to Diasa again, the goddess that she prayed to in the last section. So, then we go back to the Garinafin, and we are in the POV of Thankaru Kono here. And these fighters have succeeded in lighting up all of these airships, and Thankaru Kono is in this, it says, from their precipitous vantage point, they surveyed the billowing masses of the Imperial airships, and Thankaru Kono is being asked to, like, please descend into the gondola for safety, please come in, and he starts to kind of have a bit of a breakdown. There are tears of rage in his eyes, which I really understand. And then he has a sort of vision that he is seeing Ginmazote. And it's like, it could be easily said that this is just a moment of incredible trauma that's causing this, like, hallucination. But I think Gin's here. I think in this universe, Gin comes to visit. And he apologizes to her for losing so many lives and not anticipating all of this. And then says, for not being as good an advisor to Phyro as you and Luan had been to Kuni. And we get this moment here that I'm choked up a little bit. This had always been his secret fear. He was never as brilliant a strategist as Luan Xiaji, never as brave a warrior as Munkakri, never as resourceful an administrator as Kogo Yelu, never as adaptable as Puma Yemu, never as skilled a field tactician as Ginmazote. In all the years he had fought under the banner of the House of Dandelion, he often wondered if he deserved to be included among his companions. Did Kuni only keep him around out of pity, out of a sense of obligation because he was an old friend? I really hate this for him. Like, it's such a real, understandable fear. And especially, Kuni was very good at assembling brilliant people around himself. He could spot them. And part of the, like, disadvantage of that is when you're surrounded by brilliant people, you can get self-conscious, even if it's not actually that you are inferior to them in an intellect. It can just be that you start to think you are and trip yourself up or just get in your own head too much. So I just really felt for him on this. And Gin says, you were the lone voice that supported Phyro on the inner council. You kept the memory of Kuni's generation alive in the hearts of the young. You devoted your life to the people of Dara, serving them the best way you knew how. If that isn't mutaje, then the word has no meaning. And he says, but it isn't enough. And she says, there's no shame in honorable defeat. And she essentially tells him in the end, you have got to join the people who are fighting. They are, he starts to blame himself and be like, all of this is his fault. And she says, don't condescend to them. And I love that phrasing of it, because this is a thing that, like, recurs with a lot of sort of heroic characters, is them taking all of this responsibility for things that other people had free will. They made bargains of their own. They were ready to sacrifice things or make compromises. And yet there's this one person who tries to, like, swoop in and take credit for. Sounds like a weird way to say it when it's a negative, but that is kind of what it is. And it's like, there's an arrogance to that. So she's like, they pledged their lives. They're still working hard, and you can earn a spot with them by fucking going down with them and never yielding. And so he goes and basically uses his body as a shield to keep one of these women from being hit by a fire arrow. There is an explosion, and I don't know that he actually saved her life, because it is unlikely to me that she survived this, even though he shielded her. But it's possible, because he was sort of on top of her when the explosion happened. So it's potentially possible. So then we go to Phyro, and he is really caught off guard by this development. People of Dara using Dara tools to fight Dara. It's just not what he was expecting, and he had done a lot of studying on what they were capable of, and is truly startled based on the hardliner attitudes that he had been hearing about, that they would compromise in this way. And while a part of me really understands how he could be tricked by that, there is another part of me that is really frustrated at knowing the Battle of Zothan Gulf went the way it did for the reasons it did. And yet he isn't considering them keeping that in mind and doing the same thing again. I don't want to blame him, because how much can anybody really predict? But truthfully, it bothers me that a major battle like that went the way it did for the reasons it did, that he never considers that they may be able to pull something else off like that. So let's see. Afluro had lectured Phyro at length on the importance of Gerinifins to the Liuku way of life, and the young emperor had come to appreciate the almost sacred place Gerinifins held in the Liuku imagination. So because he understands that, this whole thing with Dara people flying them is unthinkable to him as well as to the actual Liuku people. And he is just not prepared for this complete shift. And he yells out, "Ready the riders, we must launch immediately." And it says, on board Spirit of Kiji, senior aviators gave Mota the unwelcome news. And Mota has to adjust, because this isn't how it's supposed to go. He says, launch all remaining ornithopters. Several airships had already been engulfed by the flames. Maimed and dead aviators tumbled out of the slow-falling wreckage. An explosion rocked Spirit of Kiji. Regretfully, he gave the order, abandon ship. And we go back to Goztan's POV, and she's watching these ships dismantle and people falling. This is when she starts hearing all of the mutterings of people who basically see this as a second Zothan Gulf. The gods will punish us for trying to behave like Dara Ra'aki. And I'm just realizing, I was saying, how would they see the withdrawal symptoms? And I'm wondering if they would see it as a punishment of the gods, not for failing to prove themselves, but for, behaving like they are Dara people. That never occurred to me, but that could also be a thing. That's the thing about deciding to interpret signs. Anything can be taken in any direction. You can interpret anything just exactly how you want it. And that's the danger, and that's the power. And that is what people like Goztan Ryoto are very smart and learn to take advantage of. So to vent their frustration and self-loathing, the Liuku warriors turned to mocking and ridiculing the dying Dara aviators. And we hear all kinds of insults, just to the positioning of bodies, to the ways that people are screaming. There's just all kinds of ugly comments. One of them even says something about how her brain would probably taste good after being roasted the way that it was. Yikes. So they're attempting to make themselves feel better, because this victory is not what they wanted. And unnoticed by the blood-crazed Liuku, the last ornithopters released by the Imperial airships reached their target. Traveling in ones or twos, the mechanical birds plunged into the rigging and sails and instantly exploded, spewing fire and burning oil everywhere. Liuku warriors and native slaves scrambled to put out the fires, and some of the Gerinifin crew, seeing the smoke from their home bases, returned to help. But the giant beasts did more harm than good, as they could do little to stop the tiny ornithopters, while their flapping wings fanned the flames. Yikes. That's a pretty bad situation. So they are near exhaustion. And, you know, they've got a lot. They've been through a lot. They also are wearing armor, which they're not, like, fully used to. And it says of the 50-plus Gerinifins, only 36 survived. So Goztan is ordering them back to land because they definitely need a rest. And as she is about to say that, she sees something, and everybody turns and stops and stares as other Gerinifin rise out of the jungle. And then we go to months earlier. We have a moment here between Zenkara and Phyro, where Phyro asks her to marry him. And I have to say, I haven't heard anything about, like, marrying Phyro off to some lord's daughter. Like, there has been no mention of obligation regarding his marriage. And it seems like he could just marry her if he wanted to. I hope that's true, because I'm so used to the convention of royals not having any control over their own love lives. Feels like the wrong way to put it, because it's not always what marriage is, but really like the direction of their lives, because of the fact that they have to be so carefully political about who they ally themselves with, that being like reading about somebody who is, this is now a generational monarchy, basically. If he can just marry who he wants, that'll be a real change. That's not to say that this isn't an advantageous marriage either. Like, depending on how this gets played, it could actually be perfect, you know, but I hope that nobody is going to try and get in the way of this for him. And I say this acknowledging that Zenkara is not convinced. She is unwilling to say yes initially. And when he asks again and sort of presses her, she's still kind of like avoiding his eyes and clearly thinking about the stories he has told her of court and how people are at each other's throats and there's so much lying and there's so much like intrigue, and she just doesn't know that she wants to be a part of that. And I appreciate that when she hesitates, he doesn't get angry or defensive. He understands, it seems like, exactly where her reservations are coming from. And we have a moment of him talking about, I've composed a logogram riddle for you. Look over there. Do you dare to venture a guess? And this is one of those wild things where it sounds to me like absolutely incredible that she puts together what it is that he's trying to say. But also, I can just say like 2 words and Owen will finish a quotation from King of the Hill, and I barely had to even say anything. So I have to keep in mind that the way things work, it's like different properties, different source material, but the focus is the same. But she looks over, and there is a poem that goes, wild geese fall, stunned by your grace, golden carp dive, dazed in your glow. It's a love poem. Praising her lover, Jito of White Sleeves, which I think this is somebody we've heard before. I think Thera was quoting to Zomi, or maybe the other way around. But anyway, the scene that she is seeing is a Gerinifin diving and a Krubin diving. And she's like, well, that was a wild goose and a golden carp, and a Gerinifin and a Krubin are nothing like. And he says, how can a common word, because that, I forgot the point, that comes together for the intent of the word beautiful. And he's like, that's not what I was trying to say. So she's thinking that she just humiliated herself, assuming that he called her beautiful. And he's saying, that's not what I said. But then he says, how can a common word like beautiful be sufficient for a deed like that? I will not allow it. A more appropriate word would be beautilicious or allure-travagant or maybe megapulchritudinous. I don't even know what that one is. None of which can be written in classical analogograms. I was inventing a new script. And I really enjoyed this moment because it really shows us like how similarly they approach the world. And it just made me happy. So here we go. Phyro. Over there, that's where Zomi thinks the Ryugu discovered a source of Tolyusa. Behind him, Zenkara instinctively tightened her arms around his waist. And he is going with her on a Garinafin, and she is not used to this flight. So he has the Garinafin do some like loops and dives, and she eventually gets used to it, but she is freaking out initially, and I would absolutely lose my mind. So I don't blame her one bit. Like, I would lose my mind just as somebody, and I have ridden on many roller coasters and whatnot. She would not have had the benefit of that. So she is going into this completely cold. This is a totally new sensation. Ugh. Yeah, no. So he takes her on a walk and he says, Oflura and Lady Suka have told me in no uncertain terms that I and my riders stand no chance against the Ryugu. And he goes through why. And she is like, well, then why are you taking this risk? And he's like, well, we have to be really calculated about the way we approach it. If we try to do one-to-one, it's not going to work. They are extremely skilled. They have, hundreds of years of experience with dealing with the Garinafin. All of this stuff that we've learned is like child's play in comparison to what information they are working with. But you can even out disparities. And this is before everything changed to the point where people were demanding war, but he tells her that is coming. And he asks her to wait for him at Demushi, and she says, I have my own work to pursue. She thought about her own battles ahead, persuading the elders and chieftains of Tan-Adu to join her in opposing Chief Kizen's policy of forbidding more youngsters to go to Dara to study, organizing the Aduan exiles in Dara into a community that could become a bridge between Tan-Adu and the rest of Dara, developing her hybrid script so that Tan-Adu would have the tools for entering literacy without leaving behind all the treasures of orality, encouraging her people to embrace the changes that would come with learning the ways of Dara without the fear of ceasing to be Aduan. All of this is very important. All of this is a worthy goal. All of this is something that, yes, because they are so close to her heart, she definitely needs to pursue. But I don't even know where I would start. That feels overwhelming. So he doesn't try to keep her from setting these goals, which is part of what she really appreciates about him, is that he makes no attempt to stop her from being herself. And I really love that moment. I really, really do. So we have then, there had been this story that was started in the last section about some trickster who brings old horses and a dung cart to race against a king. And the story was just dropped and we didn't get any closure to it. And we finally get it here. And what it adds up to is basically that this dude tricks the king into exercising his horses so much that they are exhausted by the time the race comes and they just lose. It's a lot of, setup to get that payoff. I have to admit, I am not entirely sure this is worth it. there are this book and the previous, I feel, are in need of heavier editing than they got. I don't know if it's that Ken Liu's name is commanding such respect that editors are afraid to hold him back, which is like one of the things I think is the biggest downfall of so many writers. For me, it's Stephen King is like the biggest example of this, where he was writing these short, tight books, and then he got really famous, and they just stopped editing him, and he began to pour out these fucking tomes that absolutely did not need to be as long as they were in any way, shape, or form. And I'm not saying that Ken Liu has reached that level, but I feel like, last time I mentioned how there's like a real repetition of ideas. I feel that there is a similar thing going on here with the way that we have to see why Phyro didn't expect Dara people to be riding the Gorinophin either. And I understand that, like, we have to see it from his perspective in some senses, but that also, like, didn't really address my concern about what he knew about Zothan Gulf and how he didn't, like, prepare for that at all. So I had a big question that kind of went unanswered in a way that I found weird, considering how warlike and preoccupied Phyro tends to be. And I only got from his point of view, like, basically a repeat of everything Goztan was thinking, just from the opposite viewpoint. And it didn't feel hugely necessary. How would I have coped with that in editing? I'm not even sure. But I just don't feel they both had to be there. And then, like, this story. What does this really add? You wear them out and then you swoop in with your fresh mounts. That's literally all it is. That's the point. And it is a very drawn out, not particularly fun story that goes on way too long. And just, that's all it is. So Phyro realized to overcome his faster, stronger, more experienced opponent, he would have to hold his own Gorinophin's back for as long as possible. I understand to a point that adding these sorts of stories into these books is part of the flavor. But there really is a line, and I feel like he's starting to cross it. And this is the first time I have started to feel that way. So I think that it's not me. I think that it is the writing. I just don't feel that I have been beaten over the head with points in other books the way I am in this book. So then, a tea house storyteller from Dara had once been present at Crescent Island and may have summarized the clash of Gorinophins thusly. And we get this whole, like, poem about it. Okay. All right. Sure. After losses suffered during the assault on the Imperial airships, the Liuku had 36 Gorinophins remaining, most of them war beasts of prime fighting age. The Dara Gorinophin force was about 50 strong, but all were fairly young and inexperienced, not unlike their riders. So he did wear them out, but he isn't accounting for everything. So these riders come out and they start doing this thing where they use the horns that direct Gorinophins in such a way that they mimic the sounds of young Gorinophins that are, like, crying. And other Gorinophin that have been trained in a more focused way would have been taught to ignore this. They would have been taught to recognize it as a feint and ignore it. But this tactic is something that was part of the deal of that Liuku native who taught Phyro about how to handle the Gorinophins. He said that I will teach you without giving away any of their secrets, which Phyro agrees to. And he didn't anticipate this. So let's see. Outnumbered and worn down, the Liuku had to rely on guile and experience rather than brute strength. So yeah, this whole, like, he is yelling for everybody to attack, and he is really upset at the death of Thankaru Kono, and sort of lets this moment get away from him. Than had told him, stick to the plan, do not ride forth. And your father always listened to counsel. Do you want to display how little faith you have in your advisors, that you ignore their advice? So Phyro is like, you're right, okay. But at this point, he's feeling like he made a mistake and that he should have ridden out with everybody because he feels vengeful. Again and again, he demanded his riders to strike harder, to fly faster, to break through the Liuku defensive perimeter. Gin Mazoti had always admonished against battlefield judgments clouded by emotion. Had she been present, she would have sighed with sorrow at how the desire for vengeance led Phyro to commit a fundamental tactical mistake. Rather than continuing to wear down his opponent by taking advantage of his Gurinefin force's superiority in numbers, agility, and youthful stamina, Phyro's attempt at a quick victory pitted his weakness against the enemy's strength. So, this is when we have the whole thing with the horns, and there's like a lot of Goztan Ryoto sort of thinking to herself, based on some of the tactics that she's using, that maybe she's just as much of a monster as Goztan Ryoto, which I'm like, you just aren't. I'm sorry. Everything that you do that's awful, yes, you're also doing it, but you're doing it with a lot more like awareness and regret. And sure, you're still doing it, but for me, that awareness and regret counts for something. It's not like a complete excuse of what you're choosing to do, but at least you're betraying some compassion, you know, like that's something. So over and over, experienced Liuku pilots guided their veteran mounts into maneuvers that seemed physically impossible. And over, they're getting like lured into spots where they get like blasted with fire and whatnot. And it says the next sentence, after that, like, whole battle is kind of, he's going on with the description of it, but the vibe is it's coming to an end and things are beginning to wrap up because they can only keep this up so long because Phyro is going very hard. No night, no moon. There was no mood-echoing storm to show the displeasure of the gods, no future foretelling omen to reveal divine sentiment. Phyro's impetuous and ill-advised all-out assault had taken its toll. Despite the fact that his Gurinefins had been fresh, the Dara riders were no match. They fell from the sky, laden with the burnt bodies of slain warriors. There were now only 18 Dara Gurinefins left against 25 Liuku. I cannot tell you how much this broke my heart, you guys. Ugh, that's not fair. And Goztan is really like feeling herself. Like, yeah, we managed this. The Liuku spirit is prevailing. It's happening. So there are some horn blasts meant to, like, you know, pull the Dara Gurinefins back. I want to call them the Durinefins. I know that that's not really anything, but it's just difficult to saying Dara Gurinefins every time just feels clumsy. So she wonders, like, if she should send people after them and chase them down. And she's deciding what she wants to do, and she hears everybody around yelling, kill them, kill them, kill them. And she is kind of trying to decide whether she should, like, give them what they want right now, or if she's caving because of simple pressure. And there's a feeling of something not being right. And I am thinking this is coming from the Tuleusa berries. But she is looking around and is like, we didn't beat them enough for them to flee the way they did. This was a choice. And also, I didn't ever see Phyro. And I would really expect him, considering how much he admired the hegemon, to be at the front of his crew. And he wasn't there, which feels really strange to me. And she doesn't know what it means, but she's like, it means something. Goztan held up her hands and waved them vigorously. She thought she heard something. The raucous cheering subsided. Across the water, a shrill whistle sounded. Sometimes to the south, to the north, some invisible thing was tearing through the darkness as though hunting for prey. No idea, guys. Genuinely do not know. Don't ask me. Don't know. But I'm over time, so I'm going to wrap up. Thank you guys so much for listening and for bearing with me. If you were in the video, you saw what a mess this was. If you're only listening, I will have edited out most of the mess. So if you were here, appreciate your patience. And if not, you don't care. And this was great, hopefully. All right, kids. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.